worries. Hi, everyone. This is Solath Rowan, one of the professors for Kazon Academy. Today we're looking at the class called KA1010, or the Introduction to Fits. The couple of main goals today that we're going to talk about is really kind of diving into what the fit window means, the definitions, how you can use it, navigating that window, because despite how the fact that it's one button, there's actually a lot of information within that little tiny space. We're also going to talk a little bit about how to build and save your own fits so that you can do your own exploration, your own building, and then also how, in relation to all of this, you can take a look and find and utilize doctrines Kazon, uh, within Kazon. So we talked a little bit about this in the previous class in terms of how to add shortcuts, but just as a quick reminder, we want to set up access to the fleet window. So I noticed that I always had the fleet window added by default to my shortcuts bar on the left-hand side of my screen. But just in case you've removed it or changed things around, first of all, I would suggest putting it back there. It's something that you'll use quite often, but you'll go to your Neocon menu and then to fittings, and remember that you'll go ahead and right click in order to add the shortcut. Like I said, you don't have to have it on there, but it's probably one of the most often buttons that I use, and so it's definitely really helpful in terms of when I'm using it. So diving into the fit window, ultimately we're going to expand upon two areas within the fit window that are used, but this is the basic space. When you hold up, you'll see the Caldari Cormorant Destroyer on screen. And also, just to define what fit means or what people generally use it for, when people say fit, they are referring to the ship and the modules attached to the ship together as a package. So, kind of the whole thing all together. There are four main areas that we'll talk about sort of in this screen, and it's really the four main areas on each ship. You're going to see rigs, high power slots, medium power slots, and low power slots. Rig slots are reserved for rig modules, and just some important notes there, or an important note for rigs. It's the one module where once you add it, you should get a dialog box that says, do you want to add it? You have to destroy it in order to remove it. Rigs are one and done, so you cannot use them over again. You have to destroy them. There are a couple of exceptions to that, but for the vast majority of rigs, you're going to be using that. Medium powered next one we're going to go into are the high powered slots. They're generally reserved for weapons, shield boosters, etc. I kind of like to think of the slots or the high power slots is affecting things around your ship. So you'll often use them to heal others, do damage, that type of thing. There are a couple, again, exceptions to a lot of things that we talk about, but for the mass majority of those high powered slots, that's what those are used for. The medium powered slots contained a number of different modules as well. The big thing to remember with medium power slots is this is where you're going to set up your shield defenses. So if you decide you ultimately want to make a shield based ship, one where your defenses are based on shield, you're going to be using a lot of these medium slots for that reason. And the other one, final one, is your low powered slots. Again, a number of different modules, but the other big difference is that if you are looking at making defenses related to your armor, that is actually where you're going to put it. So depending on the ship and the style of fit that you're trying to put together, it's going to adjust, and you're going to be using different modules based on those pieces. The other thing to notice is these are not standard. So as you look ship to ship, you'll notice a larger number of high powered slots or a fewer number, so on and so forth. So those can be adjusted going back and forth. The one final piece I want to call out on this screen before we dive in and continue is the CPU and power grid. These are really considered resources that each module will use and need to be balanced. So ultimately speaking, every single module that you'll utilize on a ship will have some sort of requirement for CPU or power grid, and you will need to actually have that in the white because it'll turn red if you've overdone it. But those need to balance, because if those are imbalanced, you actually can't run your ship. The first expansion into the fit window, we're going to hit this attributes button, and it's going to take us into something that's going to expand your window to look a little bit of something like this. This includes a little bit more information. This informational tab really is going to tell you a number of different and important elements of your ship, and it's kind of split up into 6 different sections. Each section will have a summary number that is directly across from it and will normally provide you with an important quick number as you're considering ship builds. The first one we're going to take a look at is capacitor. This is referring to the overall capacitor your ship can maintain when flying. You'll notice that with my skills that we're looking at right now, the Cormorant fit I currently have active will last for 1 minute and 34 seconds before completely depleting its capacitor. Um, Also, this number is should you be running all of your modules at the same time on all the time. So there's some advanced techniques that we could talk about in terms of rolling on and off, but we'll talk about those in later classes. The second piece we're going to look at is offense. This is going to show you your overall damage per second, or in most, I like to call it DPS. The number of 117.8 that you see there uh, uh, is the cumulative DPS for the entire ship. And the reason I say cumulative is because if a ship utilizes drones or other damage mechanisms, the Cormorant fit that we have up on screen right now does not. That will be added all together. Um, so right now we're actually seeing 117, which is just for the guns themselves. Um, the other number that you want to take a look at within this section is the one that's related to 359 HP. This is called your Alpha Strike. The Alpha Strike means when all of your guns are firing a volley, that is what on average it'll hit for. There are some builds out there that focus more on being an alpha carrier, and there are some that more focus on kind of doing sort of sustained DPS. The next one, which is oftentimes considered pretty important, is defense. And this is broken down into sort of 4 different areas. Think of them as rows. The first one on this screen you're going to see shows a shield and 4 HP/S, or hit points per second. In this case, it's showing what my passive shield regeneration is. This is actually a drop-down menu. If you see that top little teeny upwards facing arrow, if you click on that, you'll actually be able to get to a drop-down menu, and that is also then going to shift that information around depending on your fit. It's going to show you instead maybe your armor repair number, your hull repair number, or your shield boost rate. So that's also something, depending on the fit that you decide you want to create, is going to give you different numbers. Directly below that in that column, you're going to see a shield. It actually is directly related to the shields that you have and the number. So again, think hit points if you want to think about it. It'll show you the actual hit point total of your shields as well as your shield recharge time. So that 972 is my hit point shields, and that 500S is the time. The third, when you drop down that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the right hand side in a second. You're like, oh my gosh, all those colors. So then the one below that, we're looking at the armor. So same thing applies in terms of the amount that it's showing you right there. And then finally, the fourth right under that, it looks like a 3-dimensional box, is going to give you an accurate picture of your structure hit points. Diving into the section on the right hand side is going to show you the corresponding resistance amounts based on, are we talking about shields? Are we talking about um, armor? Or are we talking about hull? So if we look at this, EMP in my shields is 0%. So I probably don't want to get hit by that, but that is how much resistance my shields has if it's hit with EMP damage. You'll see the other 3 damage types there as well. The other piece, final piece, probably the number that can bring this all together, remember the hour, is that 3,786 effective hit points. It is basically showing you that based on the active resistance modules and resistances, this is about how many hit points the entire ship has or can survive in terms of damage. Obviously, if someone's using EMP, that might go up or down, depending on that. The next section underneath, we're talking about targeting. This is both your targeting strength and distance, as well as the likelihood for people to find you with offensive scanning and whether or not you can be jammed. This will also show how many locked targets you can have. So on my screen, you'll see that 7x. If this number is greater than 5, please know that you actually do need skills in order to increase your standard number beyond 5. So that's also something that you might take a look at. After that, we're going to look at navigation. This is basically understanding the maneuverability of your ship, including your maximum meters per second. The biggest timer, or I consider one of the biggest timers that you want to take a look at, is your align timer. Basically, what this means is it's your time to enter warp from a full stop. So the larger that timer is, the longer it takes for you to align to warp off into safety. If you're thinking about the fact that we are a null sec um, corporation, aligning means a lot. So you want to pay attention to that. So the last section you're going to see at the bottom, definitely not the least, some ships do massive amounts of damage with drones, is the drone section. This is going to show you the maximum control range you have. Again, that's adjusted by skills. That's also going to show you how many, the MB per sec allows you to show how much you can actually put out there. So you might notice you can't actually have 5 heavy drones out on a ship, even though you have the ability to do that because the mbit per sec is exceeding what you're able to do. So you might have to play with that a little bit. The number that's next to the arrow, which for me says zero point 0.0 DPS because this is not something that carries drones, the Cormorant. This is also going to show you how much the damage your drones are doing within your drone bay. If that number were greater than 0, it would be added back up to your full offense number about a little bit earlier. All right. So that's kind of a quick overview in terms of like understanding what a ship can be and sort of some of these different areas and definitions. So now we want to dive into building and saving your own fit. So the first thing that we're going to go ahead and do is on the left-hand side, we're going to hit that sort of wrench looking icon and where it's a browser button, but it's going to open up into the brand new world. And so this is actually how I always have my fit window open because I'm always going in and out of all of these different areas, paying attention to these different pieces. The first area we're going to look at is the hull and fix section. So you'll notice those are 2 buttons. Hardware is on one side, hull and fits are on the other. Directly below that, when we're in the hull and fits, you're going to be able to search for certain ships. This is really sort of where you're looking for ships. If you have saved your own fit, which we'll continue to talk about, you can also use search functionality, same thing here as well. The 5 buttons below the search term field are your search filters. The first one that looks like the portrait of a person, and the second one with the star surrounded by what I like to call semicircles, um, are probably going to be the ones that you at least utilize the most to begin with, but you'll utilize all 5 of those in some way, shape, or form. The portrait is your personal fittings. Any fittings that you have personally saved for yourself, that is the filter that will allow you to do that. If you have them checked off and you have nothing in the search term and hit enter, it's going to show you a cumulative list of every single fit that you have personally saved for yourself. That second icon that I mentioned is the one for corporation fittings. So very similarly to where I talked about earlier in terms of looking for ships, will allow you to see specifically the doctrines that, in our case, Kazon utilizes in battle. And because we are a PvP based corporation, these are often based on that type of fighting. The other 3 are going to show you, and I'm lumping them a little bit together, but can be just as important. The other 3 will show you community fittings, which are fittings saved by the EVE community at large. They can give you some ideas, but some of them, frankly, are a little strange. So take them with a grain of salt, I think. The 4th will restrict your filters to the current hull you have active. So, for example, you see a simulated Tempest fitting on that. So if I were to click that button, it would just show up Tempest fittings. Um, and the 5th one itself is based on the limitation of the skills that you actually have learned within your current clone. All right, so rough definitions here. The other thing as well is you can have multiple filters selected at a time. So, for example, if you wanted to look for corporation doctrines that you also currently have the active skills for, you can select the corporation filter and the skills filter, and it'll show you right away all of the fits that you could potentially already drive. You could also do that with your personal fits because sometimes you might have some really cool ships in your personal fits, but you can't drive them yet. All right, so for this, I'm going to build a Tempest, partially because I like the Tempest. It's a ship I'm pretty comfortable with. And it's really about sort of how you find modules and build your actual sort of fit and saved fit so that you can utilize it at a later date. Um, so to start, I've typed in Tempest, right? I have none of my filters on at the moment. So you'll actually see a lot of the different fits that I have saved, so on and so forth. To start with a blank ship, you'll want to select Simulate Ship across from from the name of the ship. So you'll notice it in white there. If you click on that, it'll simulate the ship for you, and you'll start with a blank ship. For this little piece, I'm going to cut out the other side of the UI for a second because we're going to focus in a little bit more on kind of searching out some of these aspects. Um, because the other part of the left-hand side of this window, which is browser-based, or which is really a browser, excuse me, is all of the hardware. Modules on one side, charges on the other. And this is anything that you can find that you can fit to a ship, a structure, anything that you can fit into a weapon. You name it, you're going to be able to find everything possible when you can get into that. Um, so the first one we're going to talk about is modules, which are ship attachments, as I mentioned, and the second one are charges. The other set of filters are split up into a little bit more detail. So you'll notice that in the white box as well. You can search for things by the slot they fit into. So you'll first of all see the vertical. So you'll see high, medium, and low, but it's backwards, so it's low, medium, and high. Um, You'll also see the ability to search for drones. You'll also then be able to search by what ship hull you currently have active. So what can fit within that ship, so what can fit on a Tempest in this case. You can also search based on the CPU power grid and calibration. So whether or not you have enough on this fit, going to still allow you to build a complete ship. And finally, that book, which is just like the other search bar, whether or not you have skills to sort of utilize what you're trying to do. So again, same thing as the last sort of area for searching. You can have multiple filters at the same time, so it can help you sort of limit or narrow down your search when you're starting to build your own ship. So I'm going to start with guns, mostly because guns are the fun part of using an offensive ship. And so for that reason, I've selected the high power filter. In this case as well, I know exactly um, what turret name and gun I'm looking for. But as you narrow down your searches, you can realize and notice that you can dive into these menus and start to look and compare different ship or different fits, different guns, and see which one best fits the ship that you're running, but also the play style that you're trying to go for. So I should also say that I'm also planning on creating an artillery-based Tempest, one that sort of shoots from farther away. And if you think about it from the callback when I talked about alpha, um, this build is built around alpha damage, not around sustained DPS. So here you'll notice on the screen you did the high, all the high slots, right? Then you go down to turrets and launchers and open that up, and you're going to continue to go down this list to find the gun that you're looking for. I also know that Tempests can run a large level of projectile turret. This is also something that might help when you select your filter, whether or not your ship can utilize these weapons. And then I'm looking for the 1400 millimeter Scout Artillery one um, underneath it, and that's what we're going to utilize and put into the fit. So there's a couple different ways that you can move something from the left-hand side um, into your fit. There's really sort of a couple ways to do the same thing. Um, the lazy way is to actually just drag or click on the actual module that you want to use on the left-hand side and drag it and drop it directly just on the portrait of your ship. Um, And that way it's just going to automatically put it into whichever slot is available. And there's really going to be no sort of rhyme or reason to it. It's usually the first empty slot available. If you want to have a little bit more control, or you want to make it look perfect, you can drag and drop it directly into the slot that you're looking for. And that will allow you to do that. Um, if you're doing something where you're going to be repeating a number of modules, the other thing that you can do is once you'll notice the first gun has been put into the Tempest fit, you can actually shift click it and drag it over and over again until you've put in the number of guns that you're looking for. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And the reason for that is you've gone through and you're looking through all of these different modules, but I want to call it a couple of things to really look out for when you're thinking about putting together your fits. Um, in this one, I've put guns, so all of my high slots are full. Um, all of my rigs are full, my medium slots are full, and I've left one down at the bottom empty in a low powered slot. The thing that I really want to call out are the two red numbers that you're noticing. I mentioned them earlier, but the indication on the top left-hand side, which just looks like a red caution sign, and then on the bottom right-hand side, you'll notice that my power grid is um, is red. What this is telling me is that my power grid cannot currently support the active modules on the ship. So if I were to actually build this, it would not be able to fly without me removing a module to balance that out. Um, one of There are a couple ways to really approach this as you're building your own ships. One of the ways is to look potentially at compact versions, or actually really looking at how much power each module is using. Um, One of the examples is compact shield hardeners versus traditional shield hardeners. Um, in this case, though, there's a pretty massive deficiency that needs to be made up. And one of the reasons here is that artillery guns actually take up a lot of power grid. So they can be a little finicky when you're making them. It's part of the reason why I picked it. This can also, your ability to manage your CPU and power grid is also affected by skills. So the more advanced your skills are, and mine are not maxed, you might actually find out that this is actually completely fine. So in this case, we're actually going to add in a different module in low power slot, which allows us to increase the power grid of a ship, which is called a reactor control unit. So pretty much any type of thing you want to do to a ship is possible. You just have to build it and sort of think about how you want to put it together. So if I were to add in this reactor control unit, you'll notice on this screen it's balanced itself out and those red markings are no longer present. So now we've finished a fit, so to speak. Um, and for a moment, the Tempest does have a drone bay, and I'm going to ignore that for a second. Um, but I'm going to come back to that. Um, but now we have this, and you're like, "Ooh, this! I really like this. I want to save this for later." All right, so this is the next part. You want to save it, right? So there's really two ways to save it within this whole menu. The first is by simply clicking on the simulated Tempest fit name and the arrow, or down in the bottom left, you'll notice the Save As button. Both of those are going to bring up the fitting management um, piece that you see on the right hand side, which is going to allow you to name it. Um, I have noticed that my personal fits get really cluttered with a lot of different ships. Because other friends of mine, other players, other corporation members have shared fits with me that I want to save. So what ends up happening if I don't actually name them in a good way is I just get lost in terms of what they do. So I recommend taking a look at the Tempest fit and thinking about the name and thinking about the goal of that fit. So in this case, the Tempest artillery fit, because it specifically is using artillery cannons. And ultimately use whatever naming convention you would like to use, but it's definitely something where if you continue to build and create new fits using them over and over again, don't you may get lost in that. Um, all right, I'm going to quickly go back to the drone bay and ammo, because the other cool thing about building simulated fits is you can also simulate the damage, which I think is really fun. Um, so you can add in drones and ammo to your saved fit so that you can simulate the actual DPS, which is again based on the skills that you have, you personally have. For drones, you'll go back to that hardware right on the other side, and find the ones that you want to have as with other modules, you can drag and drop them into the fit and add them. Um, so in this case, I've added 5 hobgoblins, which are light drones. Also each of them have selected because you can have a maximum of 5 drones selected in this fit, um, showing that they're being active in the DPS calculator happening on the right. You'll now see that you'll notice a small number because remember when we looked at the Cormorant fit, no drones, so 0 DPS. Drones, by the way, my drone skills are a little terrible on the terrible side, so please, that DPS number can be much, much higher. But you'll take a look, you'll see 48. That 48 is then also calculated up top when you see offense, and it's 48 because I haven't actually added ammo in yet, but it'll allow you to take a look at all of that. So the other thing that you can actually do is load your guns. So same thing. Um, for the charges. The really cool thing about the charges menu is that if you have anything attached to your fit that requires ammo or something to maybe a script or maybe a capacitor booster, on the left hand side, directly under the search bar, you're actually going to see those active modules as something that you can use as a filter. So in this case, the only thing active on the Tempest fit are the guns because they require ammo. By selecting that filter, it's going to show me whatever ammo I have available, what I can currently use to add in to simulate. So I used EMP because it's the best against drones, which is where we are and is often considered the higher DPS in terms of what's possible. So then if you look on the right hand side for offense, you'll notice that my damage per second is jumped up to 382. And remember that that is not currently including drones because if you look at the bottom right hand side, you'll see that drones are not included in this fit. The other thing that we talked about with alpha is the alpha hit from this ship, this fit, and my skills is just over 7,000. Right, so when I hit a ship for the first time, I should see a bigger hit than maybe someone who's using something with higher DPS but is firing more quickly. All right. So now that we saved it, right? So caveat thinking about that, thinking about ammo and drones. But let's go search for it. So on the left hand side, you'll notice that you're able to put back in artillery, and you'll notice that even though I have none of the filters selected, you'll see that the Tempest artillery fit is right there. You'll also see that blue check mark. That blue check mark means that I can currently fly it. So that means that all the skills that I have, or all of the modules on there, match all of the skills that I can to fly it. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can fly it well. Um, so sometimes you may want to take a look at increasing those skills before actually taking a ship out for a test drive, but it means that I can currently fly it. Um, the other thing to think about is now that you have it saved, you can share it. You may have already been pulling ship fits from the corporation or from other people, and you've actually been saving it. But all you need to do to add it into the chat window is by clicking and holding the actual name. So in this case, Tempest Artillery Fit, and dragging it into your chat window. It'll show up like that, and people will be able to click on it, and they'll be able to take a look and potentially add it to their own personal fits. All right, some quick final thoughts before we wrap up for the day. Um, the fits window is a sandbox. Okay, so if you are dreaming of a ship you want to build, just go build it. It's pretty fun. It'll also help you understand what skills you might be missing or need to work on to better fly a ship. Um, Use corporation members to look at new fits you're making. So there are definitely some fits within the Eve community that are considered tried and true, and you should absolutely pay attention to those. But sometimes it's fun to make a ship that, for whatever reason, is a little surprising, but it works really well. So don't be afraid to drag and drop a fit into a corporation chat box and say, hey, can someone take a look? And you might get some feedback, or they might be like, hey, that's actually kind of cool. Um, the other thing I would say, and this is something that I do all the time, especially as a newer player, if someone else is linking a fit and you like it, save it. You know, there is maybe a little bit of a limitation in how many fits you can save, but you can always adjust or edit out old ones if you feel like you don't need them anymore. But it's definitely something that will allow you to keep going back to it and grow as someone who wants to make fits. All right. Thanks very much for coming today to KA1010 Introduction to Fits. Fly safe.